The Constitution in and of itself has no power. We have to protect it. It can't protect us. And if we aren't protecting it, it will soon no longer exist. The plan that they gave us was excellent. I've actually read some studies or some experts who said that the plan was flawed from the beginning, that was never their intention for us to live free. But I want you to think back, or if you aren't familiar, then come back with me to the time of our war for independence. The men who led this war, for the most part, were very successful. They had businesses, they had estates, they had a lot to lose. Had they been content to stay a subject to the king, there would have been some restraints on their trade, some of the problems that are addressed in the Declaration of Independence, but for the most part, life would have been okay. Just like life for us now, with all the restrictions coming up and being put upon us through the Patriot Act and others, which don't conform to the Constitution, life is okay. But they were willing to risk everything that they had, their fortunes and their very lives, because they felt so strongly that liberty was worth that freedom was worth that. Better to die fighting for freedom than to live a slave. I fear we've lost a lot of that. These were not a bunch of wild, as we might say today, cowboys. These are some very learned men. Of Plato's writing, The Republic, John Adams was corresponding with one of the other founding fathers, and they asked John Adams what he thought of that particular writing. His response was he had read it in the original Greek, as well as a French translation and the English translation, and he was rather disappointed in it overall because of it deifying the state versus the liberty of the individual. This is just an example of the level of education and knowledge and the breadth of their study that these men had. How many of you have read Plato's Republic in English, much less in the original Greek or in the French? These men had a broad base of knowledge. They created something that had never existed before and literally changed the face of the earth. You look around now, there's very, very few absolute monarchs left. There are some dictators that come to power, but basically, most places in the world, it's acknowledged that the people who are governed have some right to say how they're governed. Prior to our war for independence, that was not the case. So these men gave us something that never existed before. And they were willing to risk everything they had to do that. Are we willing to risk everything we have to keep it? Or is it worth risking anything to keep? I would maintain you can't even make that decision if you don't know what it's all about. The Constitution is really a fairly simple document. At the time it was written, it was designed to be understood by anyone with a third-grade education. Now granted, a third-grade education then was not the same as a third-grade education today. By the end of the third grade, you could read, do math, knew geography and history, as well as a number of other things at that time. Now, most of them can read. So you need a little more education to understand it today. And understanding it in itself has become a debate. You read it, it's pretty plain and simple, straightforward. But there are now different points of view of how to understand the Constitution. There are those who believe we should look at the original meaning what did the words mean at the time they used them? Then there are those that say we should look at original intent. What did they intend when they wrote these? And obviously you can't know the total intention of everybody, but by looking at their writings, understanding their discourse, their debates about the Constitution itself, we can actually get a pretty clear feel for what their original intent was. And there's the one that scares me, the method of understanding the Constitution by considering it a living document that ebbs and flows and changes as our society changes, as the language changes, that the Constitution changes with it to reflect the current status. I got to confess, that was my point of view for a long time. Hey, it makes sense. Have it be a living document. Whatever it means today is what it means today. That seems like a very easy way to solve any questions about meaning. The challenge, though, is when we have a situation where people are in power, such as the Supreme Court or other judges, it means whatever they say it means. And every time we have a change of administration or a change of leadership in some area, we now have a new interpretation of the Constitution so that it is interpreted the way they want it interpreted. That's the problem with the idea of a living document. It's living according to whoever's in charge, which means it's a moving target. You can never pin it down to any specific meaning if it's going to be changing with the ebb and flow of society. So I strongly feel that we have to stick with either original meaning or original intent, or maybe a synthesis of the two. But a living document now scares me very much. The main body of the Constitution had only 7 articles, and they are pretty easy to understand. The first article talks about the legislature, the legislative branch. It talks about the age requirement to be a representative or senator, the citizenship requirements. It talks about various things like that. Pretty mundane stuff. The main things, if you're going to read and you don't want to read it all, look in sections 8, 9, and 10 of Article 1. Section 8 gives specifically what Congress can do. Yeah, what they can do. If it doesn't say in that section that they can do it, they can't do it. And understand, Congress is responsible for passing all laws, and only Congress. The judicial cannot create laws. The executive cannot create laws according to the Constitution. Unfortunately, it happens on a regular basis. Section 9 tells what Congress cannot do. There are some specific things listed in Section 9 which says Congress shall not. And there's a rather short but very clear list there of things they cannot do. And then Section 10 tells what the states cannot do. So there's a restriction on state power. These are repeated somewhat in the first 10 amendments, what we commonly call the Bill of Rights. So if you do want to understand what government can and cannot do, read sections 8, 9, and 10 of Article 1, and then read the Bill of Rights, specifically Article 9 and Article 10.